So, my name is Judy Hilyard, and I wrote this book called Soul Companion, a memoir. Yes, I was an RN. Actually, I am an RN. I'm just retired, and have some master's degrees. And as Nikki said, it was great for when I was working in a hospital setting, but it's not necessary for going to the other side of the veil. So this is the only picture that I have of me at work. And I was like 27, 28 years old. That's me in that little hat thing. And at the time, I was the head nurse of a coronary care unit in Huntington Memorial Hospital in Pasadena. So I graduated from nursing school back in a long time ago. And I worked in critical care pretty much my whole life. It was a total of 47 years in critical care. And in those 47 years, at the beginning of my career and at the end of my career, I worked at the bedside. In the middle 30 years or so, I was either in some kind of administrative kind of position, like a head nurse or a director of critical care, or I was in education within critical care. I fell in love with critical care from the first moment I was in it. And I loved both education and administration, so I kind of went back and forth between the two kinds of positions. And then the last few years of my life in nursing, I was working here at Ashland Hospital and the little 4-bed ICU. I had worked in medium-sized hospitals and big hospitals. I had never worked in a little hospital before, and I'd never worked in a 4-bed ICU before. And I loved it. I mean, when I went back to the bedside, it was like falling in love every day. I just loved it. However, as I was continuing to work during that time, I started becoming a little uncomfortable or concerned, particularly around patients that we were taking care of that were in the critical care unit, and they had very little chance of survival, as well as patients who had a big chance of survival. And we were doing the same thing with both groups of people. And I started getting uncomfortable about what we were doing with people who were very, very likely unlikely to survive. So a question came to mind, and I kept that question in my mind for quite a long time. The question was, were we hindering their chances of having a peaceful death by focusing only on trying to save their life at all costs? And I didn't know the answer to that, but it bothered me a lot. So while I was contemplating that, I'm a big contemplator. As I was working and I was contemplating that, I found out that there was a program that was going to be brought to the Rogue Valley, and it was called the Sacred Art of Living, Sacred Art of Living and Dying, and it was created by a fellow by the name of Richard Groves. And Richard had been, for a good part of his life, he had been a Catholic priest. And he eventually left the priesthood, and he eventually left Catholicism. He met a woman, fell in love, got married, had kids, and he changed his profession to being a chaplain. And he was a chaplain in Bend, Oregon, which is where he lives and where the Sacred Art of Living Center. Yeah, I'm good. No, I'm good. I need to move. This, go on. There we go. So he's the director of the Sacred Art of Living Center in Bend. And he had created this 2-year program, the Sacred Art of Living and Dying. And in his time as chaplain, he came upon lots of people who were dying, who were not ready to die, and they were not ready to let go, even though their body was ready to die. And Richard is an amazing guy. He's a researcher. So he did a lot of study research. He speaks like 11 languages. He can read the original text in the original Bible. I mean, he's an amazing fellow. Anyway, in working with these people who were afraid to die, what he discovered is that they were just hanging on, by their fingertips when their body was ready to go. So he came up with the idea that these issues that people had that they hadn't completed in their life, that they were hanging on to something for some reason. And he called that spiritual pain. And if people had the spiritual pain, they found it very difficult to let go and ease into an easy death. And he identified that there were 4 spiritual pains that went across pretty much all cultures. And those were issues around relationships, forgiveness, hope, and meaning. And he used to say, and I found that to be true, forgiveness is like the common cold of spiritual pain. Pretty much everybody has forgiveness issues. And if they're struggling at the end of life, it makes dying much more difficult for the person dying and for the family members. So in that 2-year program that we took, we learned to identify, diagnose, and treat spiritual pain and others. And that was a wonderful program. It didn't totally answer the question that I had about were we hindering patients' chances who would probably not survive a critical care setting. Were we hindering them from having a peaceful death? I still didn't totally know the answer to that. So as we were finishing that 2-year program, Richard Groves was about to start another 2-year program, which sounded very interesting to me. It's called an Anam Aira apprenticeship. And the terms Anam Aira are Celtic words meaning soul friend or soul companion. And it comes from the tradition of back in the Middle Ages, that between like the 6th century and the 12th century AD, Celtic Europe, the villages in Celtic Europe all had people that functioned as Anam Airas for the village. So those people would help the rest of the neighbors and stuff come up with, work through any spiritual pain and that kind of stuff. They helped them move through the process of dying so that they could have a peaceful death. So Richard Groves and his wife Mary created that program along with one of their really close friends, John O'Donohue. And probably a lot of you know who he is. He's a theologian, or was. He was a theologian, a philosopher, an author, a poet, One of the books that he wrote is titled Anam Aira, and that was one of the first books we had to read in that 2-year program. So the first hour of that, Richard was talking about the tradition of Anam Aira. And I remember thinking, as I was sitting there listening to him, that I had heard him talk about that in the last program that I took. And I was sitting there thinking to myself, well, I mean, it's interesting. I enjoyed listening to it, but I wasn't going to learn anything new that hour. Well, I was wrong. He said like 4 sentences that knocked my socks off. He said, it was a wake-up call for me. So he said, there were some Anam Airas in the Celtic time that had a special ability. They could not only walk with someone to dying, get them ready for dying. They could walk with someone through dying. They could escort them to the other side of the veil at their moment of death. And they were called Anam Aira, a carer of the soul. And when he said that, I felt like I had been hit with a bolt of lightning. I sat up in my chair and I said to myself, I need to know how to do that. And I soon found out that that wasn't being taught in that 2-year program. The Anam Aira stuff was being taught, not the Anam Aira stuff. And I didn't know. I mean, this kind of thing had never happened to me before, that I, heard a few sentences and I'm saying, I need to know how to do that. I had no idea why I thought that. And I also didn't have any idea how I was going to figure out how to do that. It was something that Richard talked about that was practiced in the Middle Ages in Celtic Europe, not in 2010. So as I started contemplating how I was going to learn how to do that, I mean, I was still working at the time in critical care at Ashland Hospital, and I was taking the Anam Aira apprenticeship. So back in 1985, I was in a bookstore, and one of those things happened that you hear about periodically. I'm standing looking at books, and a book fell on my foot off the shelf. And the name of it was Far Journeys by Robert Monroe. So I took it home and read it, and I was just flabbergasted with it. So Robert Monroe was a guy who, in the 1950s and 60s, he was a businessman in New York City. And in 1958, he started having what he later termed out-of-body experiences. He would wake up in the middle of the night in his bedroom, and he would be on the ceiling or on the other side of the window looking in, or on the floor or somewhere. Now his body wasn't there, his body was in the bed. But if he was on the ceiling, his consciousness was up there looking down at his body and his wife's body in the bed. And at the first time that happened, he got really mad. Who's that man in bed with me? My wife. He recognized his wife, but he didn't recognize himself. So he started having these experiences fairly often in the middle of the night. So initially he thought that he was going crazy or he was dying. So he went to doctors and psychiatrists and surgeons, and for about a year he went to all kinds of people, and nobody could find anything wrong with him. So he decided that, well, he was just going to play with it. So before he'd go to bed at night, he'd say, okay, I want to wake up in Paris or London or wherever. And at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, he'd wake up, and his consciousness was walking in the streets of Paris or wherever he had said that he was going to wake up that night. So for several years, this is my lingo, he bebopped around the earth. he went places on the earth. In his first book, Journeys Out of the Body is part of that history, those first years. But as he was traveling out there, he eventually met up with a guide, a spiritual guide, a non-physical guide. And the guide said, would you like to go someplace more interesting? And Bob, who was very adventuresome, said, "Yeah, let's do that." So he took him to the other side of the veil. Now, the veil, how I use that word veil is, it's an energetic barrier between physical life and physical death. There's actually maybe not a barrier there at all, and I think it's less barrier than it used to be. But anyway, so this guide took him to the afterlife, to the other side of the veil. So Far Journeys was the first book that he wrote about that experience. And it just fascinated me. And then he came out with a third book called The Ultimate Journey, which came out in like 1992, I think. And that was further exploration on the other side. So in the meantime, in the early 1970s, he really wanted to study what was happening to him. So he created the Monroe Institute, and part of the Monroe Institute was a laboratory that could monitor blood pressure, pulse, EKG, EEG. He had this machine that was sort of the precursor to a brain scan, so that when he was in these states, they could see what areas of the brain was lighting up. So initially, he was the guinea pig, and he would go off on these travels, and then he had people in the lab that would monitor him. And then as people got interested, lots of other people started wanting to have these experiences, and he taught them how to have the experiences. And then he would be in the lab, watching all of this. And as he was traveling out there on the other side of the veil, he went to lots of, there's not words to describe a lot of what goes on the other side, so you have to use words that are here. So I would say there were lots of areas on the other side, lots of levels of consciousness or levels of awareness on the other side that have different functions, and you can have different experiences in them. So as he was traveling out there through the years, he was documenting all of this, and he labeled many of those areas or levels of consciousness by focus levels as a way so that everybody had the same language to talk about the same place. So focus 1 or C1 is everyday consciousness, what we're all in now. Focus 10 is what Bob Monroe called mind awake, body asleep. When we're in a meditative state, when we sit down to meditate, our body is relaxed and comfortable, and our mind is aware and awake and alert, but not traveling anywhere. So mind awake, body asleep, meditative. And focus 15 and beyond, it's considered a no-time state. And that's hard to grasp from this point of view, that on the other side there is no time. There's no past, present, future. There's only the eternal now. Focus 23, there's lots of things that can happen, or does happen in Focus 23, but I'm just going to highlight one of them. probably most of you know, I know people in my life that I've met that were stuck in their life. People that, you know, they wanted to have a good life, they wanted to be successful, they wanted this or that, and they never could get their life pulled together to do those things. They were stuck in their life. And sometimes when people that are stuck in their life, when they die, they're so stuck that their soul doesn't know they've died. And they go to Focus 23. Now, normally when somebody dies, and I'll talk about this in a bit of detail, but they go further on so that their soul gets reintegrated into the afterlife, into being a soul and not a human. But some people who are stuck in this life here, when they die, they end up going to Focus 23 and they end up being stuck there. Focus 24 through 26 is what Bob Monroe called the belief system territory. If someone has a strong belief about what's going to happen to them when they die, a strong belief, it's not just that, yeah, they think that might happen. If they got a strong belief, then they go to the belief system associated with that belief. So there's this area on the other side called the belief system territory that has every spiritual belief area that has ever existed for humans on this earth or whoever will exist on this earth. It's a big area. So if you got a strong belief, you know, and I grew up fundamentalist evangelical Christian. There was a strong belief about what happened when you died. And you either went to hell or you went to heaven, and you knew what was either. So when I was traveling out there, I initially decided I never wanted to go to the belief system territory because I didn't want to get stuck there. So Focus 27 on the other side is it's a way station, and when we're coming in to be born, when a soul is coming in to be born, that soul comes to Focus 27 and works with the guides and teachers and helpers to plan out that life, to plan out the things they want to learn, the lessons they want to learn, the troubles they want to get into, the happiness they want to have, the people they want to be involved in one way or another. All of that gets planned out, and that gets planned out in Focus 27. And most people, when they die, go back to 27 as a way to start reintegrating back into the soul self. The people that don't go there initially are the people that end up in Focus 23 or stuck, or the people that end up in the belief system territory. And they don't stay in the belief system territory a long time, but they're there until they're ready to not be there. And the other group of people that don't go to Focus 27, they just go past go, just go on, are people who are enlightened, like the Dalai Lama or Gandhi or somebody like that. They don't need the remedial work of reintegrating. They've already got it down. So my time, so I figured, number one, that I'm telling you all this because I went to the Monroe Institute to figure out how I was going to be an Anam Aira. Because I knew at the Monroe Institute, one of the programs that they had was a program called Gateway. And it teaches you to go to the other side of the veil, to go to those different levels of awareness that Bob Monroe had described, and teach you how to go there, what to see, have experiences, and how to come back, which is a good thing, how to come back. So for me, what I thought when I was thinking about, well, so how am I going to be an Anam Aira? It seemed to me that there were two parts of the process. One, I would need to know when somebody's dying, not just when they're getting ready to die, but when are they going to be ready to leave their body. So that if I'm going to escort them to the other side, I could be there then, either energetically or physically. And the other part of the process, so if I'm taking them over to the other side of the veil, I need to know what's over there, how to get there, where to take them, and how to get myself back. So in thinking about how I was going to be an Anam Aira, I decided to go to the Monroe Institute. I took from December 2012 through early February 2013, I went back there and took 3 different programs. The Gateway program, learning how to go to the other side and come back. Lifeline, which taught us how to go to the other side and find people who were stuck in Focus 23 and help them move on. And then Exploration 27, where we spent most of the week in Focus 27. It's an incredible level of awareness it just has incredible experiences and amazing. It's just amazing. And then there's there's also some focus levels beyond 27, 34 to 49. And actually, just a few months ago, I took another program from the Gateway, from the Monroe Institute. I took it online, and it's called Starline 1. And we went way out into the universe, into the ethers. And that's a whole other story. What?
You're back.
Yes. So what I want to do right now is I want to transition into, I want to present some case studies that I have in the book that represent some of the experiences that I've had both as an Anam Cara and as an Anam Aira. So the first one I want to talk about is my experience with this 90-year-old or 85-year-old woman, Karen. And this was the first time I ever escorted somebody across the veil at their moment of death. But I didn't know that's what I did until the next day. So I'll be telling you about it. So Karen was an 85-year-old woman who was in a coma and dying in Southern California. She was at her home, and she had round-the-clock caregivers. And she wasn't responsive to anybody. I mean, she wouldn't talk, and if somebody asked her something, she didn't respond to anybody. But she was very restless, and the caregivers were having a hard time, excuse me, keeping her in bed. And I knew her twin sister, Kathy, who lived here in Ashland. And Kathy knew about my work, and she asked me if there was anything that I could do to help her from a distance. Well, so yes, I thought I could do something. So I decided that I would see if I could connect in with her soul. So how I do that, I'll just kind of briefly explain how I do that in any given time. I sit down with a notebook in my hand, and there's a special kind of CD that I put on, and with headset. And it's a CD, a kind of CD that's Bob Monroe labeled HemiSync. He created that technology many years ago, back in the 70s. So there's two levels of sound that you're hearing. You're hearing the sound that you can hear, and each ear hears something a little different. But there's also sound embedded under the sound that you can hear consciously. And those sounds are also different. There's one level of hertz going in one ear and another level of hertz going in the other ear. And it makes a third sound in your brain. And when I first started doing this, it doesn't happen anymore. When I first started doing this, it was true. I mean, I could feel the sound going back and forth in my head like this, going from one hemisphere to the other. It doesn't do that anymore. I'm glad. So I get into this meditative state with a hemisync sound, and it brings you into a deep meditative state, not a deep one. And then what I do is I just say the person's name, their first name and last name, and I'm there wherever they are. So with Karen, I had talked with Kathy, and so I said, okay, so I will go see if I can connect in with her. So I get into this meditative state, I say her name, and I'm in her room in Southern California. And I can see her thrashing around, and I can see her soul is hovering a little bit above her body. So I told her who I was. I introduced myself and told her that Kathy, her sister, had asked me to come see if I could help. And she said, "No, go away. What are you doing here?" She was she was a grumpy person by nature. She was very grumpy. And she just wanted me to go away. But I kind of decided I would hang out for a little while to see if she'd change her mind. And she did. So this is what I got. And as I said, I write it down as it's happening, and then I type it up. So Karen responds immediately and with irritation. Oh. So I went away. Did I say I went away? And then I came back the next day. She said, "Yeah, you can come back the next day." I'm sorry, I kind of jumped ahead there. So she said, "Yeah, you come back the next day." So the next day I sit down, I get into my meditative state. I called her name, and I'm there with her. And then she says, with irritation, "What took you so long to get here?" And then sounding relieved, "Yes, I will trust you." I say, "Good, how can I help you?" Karen, sounding worried, said, I'm so frightened about dying. I don't know how to do it. I've been an angry bitch my whole life. I'm afraid that I'm going to hell, even though I want to believe there's no hell. I explained to her that there is no hell. It's only a trap that your mind has put you in. It feels like a hell, but it's just a loop of thinking that you're in. Karen responds with intensity. Well, how do I get out of this thinking? It's been this way my whole life. My mind is in control, and I can't stop it. You can stop believing what your mind is telling you. You are not an angry bitch. You are a sacred, precious being. Karen, sounding irritated, well, how do you know? You don't even know me. And I continue, well, I know that we're all precious beings, and you are no different from anyone else on earth. You are a precious soul who has been living in a body. That body will not live much longer, but as a soul, you will continue to live. You will go back to the joy and love you were before coming into body, the loving being that you are. Karen, very curious, well, how do I believe that? And I explain, you don't have to believe it, just allow yourself to know the truth of it. Well, how do I do that? And I say, listen to my voice. Just listen. Focus on what I'm going to say. Listen without any judgment. For just this time, imagine that your mind is still. Focus only on the words I'm going to say to you. Are you ready? Karen, unsure. Yes, I guess so. Well, at that moment, I was as unsure as Karen because I had no idea what I was going to say to her that was going to make it any better. Yet, as I started to mentally give her a message, this is what came out. And I would say to you that it's guidance. There's lots of times when I'm over on the other side when I don't know the next thing I'm supposed to do or could do or that would be helpful. There's always guidance that shows up. So I just go with it, thank God. So this is the guidance that came, and it didn't come out of my mouth because I wasn't speaking, but it came out. Karen, you are a precious holy being, full of love and understanding and compassion for that body you have. That body is not you. You are beyond, above, and wholly greater than your body. You are love, you are holy, you are an integral part of God. You are now, you have always been, and you will always be. Karen is silent, listening, barely breathing, taking this in, allowing it to sink into her awareness, into her soul, into her whole being. She starts to cry, a cry of release of judgment, anger, distrust, isolation, loneliness, fear, release of all of her negative feelings towards herself and others for a lifetime. Stillness now, profound, precious stillness, peace, joy, being held on the wings of love. The immeasurable depth of stillness, peace, and joy lasts for some time. I have no idea how long because it feels like forever. The encounter is so profound that I am barely breathing. I'm sort of like this because I don't want to disturb the atmosphere. It feels like if I took a normal breath, it would somehow disturb the peace. The stillness there and the stillness here are the same. There's no boundary between here and there. The profound stillness that surrounds Karen also surrounds me in my little cottage. Stillness beyond expression. Karen's family, her parents, and loved ones that she has known in this lifetime and other lifetimes are surrounding her. They are holding her, hugging her, loving her. She is taking it in, allowing love to fill her. Joy, peacefulness, the golden light of love. After some time, that image fades, and I'm back in my cottage. But I'm changed. I don't know how, but I know that I am. And everything that makes up my cottage seems changed too. The boards, the nails, the foundation, even my little dog Sophie sleeping at my feet. Everything is different, brighter, cleaner, open. From that moment, I truly knew who we are, who I am. I knew, and I still know, I am, and everyone else is, soul, spirit, mind stream. Whatever the descriptor, we are beyond all description. I was in a state of ecstasy for hours after that. I don't remember what I did, I just remember feeling blissed out. No place to go, nothing to do but be me. A me greater than I could have ever imagined before this. But what was this? I wasn't sure until the next day. So later, when the blissed out feeling eased off, I called Karen, or Kathy, her the sister, and told her that I had connected in with Karen and that I was going to be writing it up and that I would take it over to her place the next day. And she said that the caregivers had called her later in the afternoon and said that Karen had died around 3:30 that afternoon. And had been peaceful. So when I took the information over to Kathy the next day, and she read it, and we talked, and she said, you know, Karen didn't die at 3:30. That's when the hospice nurse came to pronounce her. That official pronouncement is the date and time that somebody officially dies that goes on your death certificate. But around 1 o'clock that afternoon, she stopped being restless and just settled into peacefulness. And at 1:20, she stopped breathing and her heart stopped. I was with her in this experience that I just read to you from 1 o'clock until 1:40. So when Kathy told me that, that's when I realized that I had just escorted Karen across the veil at her moment of death. I just didn't know that's what I was doing at that time. I mean, it was an amazing experience, and I had no other, I didn't have an explanation for what it was at that moment. But that was my my first experience of being a classic, traditional Anam Aira. Now, what I would say is I go across the veil for various reasons. I go across to escort somebody across at their moment of death. I've also so I've done that probably for, I think, 7 people. But one of the things that I've discovered over time is that if I'm working with somebody who's having trouble not wanting to let go, one of those other guidance things that happened is the guidance that I could take the soul over with me for a visit. And I've taken probably 40 or 50 people over for a visit before they die. And once that happens, when they go over there and visit and they have this initial reunion with loved ones and all of that, they're not afraid to die anymore. So then there's no need for me to escort them at the moment of death. So the taking over for a visit is really helpful. And then I bring their soul back, and the soul enters the body again. And the other way that I go across the veil is, and I've done this for hundreds and hundreds of people, if somebody's already died and loved ones here are concerned about them or worried about them or just wondering how they're doing or curious how they're doing, then I can go over to the other side, say their name, meet them, have a conversation, write that down, and bring it back to the loved ones. So for me, what I've done is I've had a definition of, for me, Anam Aira work is anytime I go across the veil, for whatever the reason is. So the next one I want to highlight for you is Samuel. Samuel was a 90-year-old Jewish guy when I met him. And he had had prostate cancer for a number of years, but it was pretty stable. It wasn't growing much or anything. And he had lived with that prostate cancer for quite a long time. And I knew his wife. His wife had taken some Reiki classes from me. I'm a Reiki master, and she was in one of our Reiki groups. So there was a period of time when the cancer started growing, started metastasizing, and he started having pain. So his wife had asked me if I could come do some Reiki treatments on him, which I did. And I hadn't met him before. So in those times when I would go over there, I went over every week or 2 weeks and gave him Reiki treatment. And we got to talk a lot. And around that time, he had just finished writing a book. It was about a 100-page book, and it was about his early life. And when he got married, when he was, I think he was in his late 20s when he got married, he had grown up, let me say this, he had grown up in Berlin during World War II. And he lived in Berlin during World War II. And he eventually, when the war was over, he and his sister eventually immigrated to the United States. And he met a woman, got married, and had kids, but he had never told his family any of his story. So he had written it down because he knew that he was in the early process of dying, and he wanted his family to know about his early life. So he was in his early teens when the Nazis came to power in Germany. And he and his father and mother and sister lived in a Jewish neighborhood in Berlin. And early in the war, early in the takeover of the Nazis, takeover of Germany, his father had gotten killed by the Nazis. And then his mom and his brother, his sister and Samuel tried to continue to live in their house and just keep a low profile. And one day they went out to do some shopping, and that day was the day that a group of Nazis came through the neighborhood and rounded all of the Jews up and took them away. So when they got home that night, there was no one in the neighborhood, and all of the houses had signs that, this is a Jewish house, and they knew that they needed to get out of there really quick. So they had some friends in another part of the city that were not Jewish, but they were good friends, and they agreed to hide them. So his mom and sister and Samuel spent the rest of the time in this other house in another part of the city during the war. And they would periodically, they would sneak out and go back to their old house to get things. They had initially left all of their money and papers, and everything was there, so they would sneak out at night to go get things that they needed. And one night, when Samuel and his sister were sleeping, the mom snuck out, but she never came home. Mm. They never saw her again. And Samuel essentially thought the worst, that the Nazis had got her, they had tortured her, they had killed her, they had sent her to the concentration camp, whatever it was awful. So he had given me one of his books that he had written, and after I read it and I came back to do another treatment on him, I was asking him about the information he had written in the book, and one of the questions that I asked him was, what did he think about the Nazis now? What did he think about them? And he said that, let me just, there was a little sentence here I forgot to say. Later in the war, he was caught twice in Berlin and tortured and beaten, but he escaped both times. Mm-hmm. His sister was never caught, and they reconnected when the Americans came through town, through the city. So what he said was that he had forgiven the Nazis for what they did to him, but he could never forgive the Nazis for what they did to his mother. He didn't want to forgive, he didn't want to forget, and he didn't want to talk about it anymore, thank you very much. So I said, okay, that's fine. So I was at that point doing some of my Anam Aira work. So we were doing, I was working with him on other forgiveness issues, and he was willing to do forgiveness on lots of things, but not that. So his disease progressed, and about a year later, I had heard that he was really quite sick at that point. So I called him and asked him if he was at all interested in dealing with that forgiveness issue around the Nazis. And he said yes, he was interested. He wanted to deal with it. And initially I thought that I would take him through a forgiveness issue that I'd taken myself through a few times, and I had some stubborn forgiveness issues that I had a hard time letting go of, and I found this process, and it worked really well for me, and it had worked well for him on these other forgiveness issues. So initially I thought, well, I'll just take him through that process. But then I thought, well, maybe if I go find his mother and have a conversation with her so that he can experience who she is now and what she's like now, that maybe that's what he would need. So that's what I did. So I find Gertrude in an exquisitely soft-lit space. This place is very expansive. There are no boundaries. The color around her is a golden and sparkling silver, very soft texture, puffy softness. Gertrude is in the center of this spacious area. She is glowing with a soft light. The light is coming from within her and all around her. There is no differentiation between inside and outside her. Gertrude and the space have a vibrant glow, the glow of joy, love, and deep and abiding peace. Gertrude is a pure essence of that love and profound joy. And I would say there's been two people that I've met on the other side that were like her. They were just profound, beautiful, incredible essence of love. And that's all you get. And she was one of them. So I say to her, Gertrude, your son, Samuel, would like to connect in with you. And Gertrude answers to her son, yes, I'm here, my dear son. I have much to share with you. I want you to know that I am exquisitely well. I have been so since coming here. My transition was as it needed to be, and of no consequence or trauma. Just a transition from physical life to love beyond earthly imagination. My last thoughts were of you and your sister. My last feelings on that side were of gratitude for my children and the love I gave and was dearly given. There is no greater joy than that. Dear son, release the images and thoughts you have of my passing. Release the concern, release the fear, release the guilt, release the worry, release your idea of responsibility to me and protection of me. They are of your imagination, not of reality. Son, remember my love for you and your sister. Remember only that, for that is all that is of consequence. And one of the things that I realized sort of later, is that Gertrude had never addressed how she died. And that's true of, there's only been one person in the hundreds and hundreds of people that I've connected in with on the other side that had said anything about how they died. And the reason was it was an important impetus for something else that happened on the other side, a good thing. So normally people don't say anything about the how, when, where, by what means, and by whom their death occurs, because it's not relevant after they transition. It's a means of transitioning from the physical to the non-physical, of no more significance than the importance of a doorway walked through to go from one room to another. So Gertrude continues, I met so many of our friends and our family and friends upon arriving here. Such a loving welcome. It could not be otherwise. Our lives on earth are as we plan and intend. The life all humans live, the life you have lived, is about opening to profound love and compassion for who we think we are and who we think others are. There is really no difference. The lessons, the hard, challenging lessons when learned, have a great reward. The thrill, the exquisite joy and celebration experienced here for the completion of difficult lessons is dearly worth it and beyond any concept of real difficulty in the larger picture of growth. You will see this. You have already experienced it just a little. It is our gift to you, my dear son, and there's many more gifts to come. You have almost completed an honorable and loving life. You have much to be proud of. You chose a difficult and taxing lesson. You're in your final phases of loving completion. Fear not, worry not, be not concerned for me or any of our family or friends. We are in joyful reunion with each other and all there is. There's no greater joy and reward. There is nothing to desire. There is only light and love of our being. There will be such a celebration, such joy and lightness, and all the love, the profound, ever-present, all-illuminating love of all. And when I moved there, having a conversation with somebody who's died, the phrases I tend to get that to me represent the God word or the Creator word, one of those is all there is, in caps. Mm-hmm. All there is, or another one, the love of all. Those are the expressions that I get that mean that the word God that we're used to using. So she continues to say, peace and love, my dear son, peace and love and the presence and the all-present love of all be with you and your dear wife, Sarah. You have done very well, and your joy and peace will be beyond anything you can now imagine. We will help you tap into that now. Peace, my dear son, peace and love now and for always. As I read this communication to Samuel, he cried, releasing over 70 years of worry, fear, guilt, and not knowing, only imagining his mother in the most serious of situations. After some time, he looked up, took a deep breath, and leaned back in his chair. No words were necessary. He smiled. And he died, a few weeks later, peacefully. So that was a wonderful experience for me. The next one I want to talk about is an interesting one, because for me it had a little bit of, quote, evidence. So this was, I had a friend, I still have the friend, but she used to have a foster home. And one of the women in the foster home was a 90-plus-year-old woman. Her name was Beatrice. And she had been on hospice for many, many months, had been in a coma for several weeks, hadn't had anything to eat or drink in several weeks. And the hospice staff kept thinking, she would die, but she kept living, and she kept living. Didn't know, what she was living on. She wasn't taking any sustenance or anything. And Kathy knew of my work, and Beatrice had a son, an older son, who would come visit almost every day. So they were all concerned that she was hanging on, and they didn't know how to help her move on. So Kathy told him about my work. His name was John. And Kathy said, you know, if you're interested, maybe Judy could connect in with your mother and find out what's keeping her here and help her move on. And he said that he was interested in me doing that. So Kathy called me, and I sat down in my cottage and put on my headset and got into my meditative state, and I called Beatrice's name. And she's immediately like right there in front of me. And she said, one of my sons, Billy, is estranged from the rest of the family. He probably deserves it, but I feel so sad that for him. He's alone, and that makes him all the more angry. I had hoped that I could bring the whole family back together before I died. It's my fault that I couldn't get that done. But I can't give up my life while he's still outside the family bonds. I want to fix this, but I don't know how to do it in my condition. I suggest that I take her soul over to the other side for a visit, having no idea how that was going to help anything. But she said, yeah, she'd like to go. So I said, okay, so take my hand. And Beatrice took my energetic hand and her energetic hand, and off we went. And we land in the park at Focus 27, and she starts squealing with delight. I look up and understand that the man standing in front of us is the soul aspect of her estranged son, Billy. Now, you might ask, I knew this by this time, I don't, because I'd had some other experiences, but you might ask, Billy's alive, what's his soul doing over there? Well, that's because we're multidimensional beings. We are souls that exist beyond time, beyond space, and we are everywhere, all the time, everywhere. So, obviously his soul knew we were coming. So his soul went to Focus 27 and met us there. So I stepped off to the side to give them privacy. The two of them talked together for some time. Then they hugged, and her son walked away. It seemed like she had helped him know how to reconnect with his siblings. Patricia was peaceful now. I took her soul back to her body, and she entered quietly, easily. And then I wrote up that experience that I had, and I drove it over to Kathy's foster home. And when I got there, John, Beatrice's older son, was there, and he was sitting at her bedside. So I went in and I handed him the paper and said, this is what I got from connecting him with your mother. And he read it, and he was on one side of the bed and I was on the other, and I said, does that make sense to you? And he said, yes, it does. But I didn't want to have a conversation across Beatrice, so I just stayed there for a few minutes, and then said my goodbyes and left. Well, the next morning I got a call from Kathy that Beatrice had died that night. And about a week later, Kathy called me again to say that John had come back to the foster home to kind of fill her in on some happenings with the family. They had had a get-together about a week after their mother died. It wasn't a funeral, but it was like an early appreciation of her life. So a whole bunch of people there, family, friends. And Billy comes in. And Billy hadn't been to any family thing in a long time, and any interaction that the family had had with him, he was a pistol. But he came to this happening, this event, and John said he walked in, and announced to the whole room that he had had a dream the night before his mother died, and he didn't want to talk about it. So nobody asked him about the dream. And he stayed there a while and talked to a few people kind of briefly, and then he left. And then John came back one more time about a month later. At that point, they had had the funeral, and they had the reception at John's house. And again, Billy showed up. And again, he walks in and announces to everybody that he had a dream the night before the mother died, and he didn't want to talk about it. So John goes in the other room and gets the write-up that I had given him, and he hands it to Billy, and he says, "Please read this." Billy reads it and hands it back to him, and John said, "Is that your dream?" And Billy says, "Yes, but I don't want to talk about it." So that was the last time John ever came back to update Kathy. So I don't know for sure whether that family became whole. I believe they did, because I believe that Beatrice helped her son from the other side, help him know how to reconnect. So, oops, I haven't gone forward here. Sorry. There's Beatrice. I'm going to skip Sophie, because I've got way more to talk about than we have time. So Sophie for another day, or you can read it in my book. So I want to talk about Sister Mary. So while I was at the Monroe Institute learning, taking the Lifeline program, and the Lifeline program was learning how to go to Focus 27 and then go to Focus 23, where people who were stuck were hanging out, and help them move on so that their soul can get reintegrated back where it belongs. And each program was a week long, and at that point we had been doing it 2-3 days, and I'd gotten really good at it. There was always somebody there in Focus 23 when I arrived, ready for me to assist them in moving them on. But so this one time, and initially I was new to traveling on the other side at this point. I hadn't done it that often. And during that time, when I was new at it, I had the sense of sort of movement. When I would go from Focus 27 to Focus 23, there was a sense of movement, of travel. And what was between Focus 27 and Focus 23 is the belief system territory. So I would cruise above the belief system territory. Just go way over. So this one time I'm cruising over the belief system, and I feel like I'm being drawn down. And I don't want to be drawn down to the belief system. So I muster all of my intention, and I go on to Focus 23. And there's nobody there. There was always somebody there, but this time there was nobody there. So I thought, okay, well, maybe I'm supposed to go back to the belief system, even though I didn't want to. I had enough trust in the process that I knew that that's probably what I needed to do. So I went back up there till I felt the pull and allowed myself to kind of get sucked down into the belief system. So this is what I sense or experience. I'm in a nun's cell in the medieval time when nuns lived in small stone rooms in a convent or a crypt of a church. This room was bare of furniture with only a small bed, a table big enough for a candle, and a small wooden chair. There's a nun pacing back and forth in her room, repeating over and over to herself, I need to be freed from here. I don't believe these teachings anymore. I need to be freed. I need to be freed. I understand that her name is Sister Mary. So I start talking to Sister Mary, telling her how I could help her move out of that area. And I realized there's a pillar behind me. So when I'm over on the other side, I'm not seeing with my eyes. I'm aware, when you're on the other side, you're aware 360 degrees. There's no back or front. So I was aware that back there was a pillar in the corner. And I could see that there were several nuns peeking their head out around the pillar. They were listening to the conversation Sister Mary and I were having. And it seemed to me like they didn't want to be noticed, but they were interested in what I was saying. So I didn't pay much attention to them because I was focused on convincing Sister Mary that I could help her. So I explained to Sister Mary, I can take you to a place where you will have much more freedom of thought, and wondrous possibilities for expanded learning, if you would like. Yes, I need to get out of this restricted area. I don't fit here anymore. Please help me, Sister Mary says, with a sense of relief. I hold on to Sister Mary's hand, and we're about to lift off when I realize there's one of the nuns from behind the pillar runs out and grabs Sister Mary's other hand. And then as we're lifting off, another nun runs and grabs that nun's other hand, and so forth, until there's a group of nuns, 6 or 7 deep, hanging on to Sister Mary, who's hanging on to me. So we all lift off, and we go to the park in Focus 27. And I stepped down first. One of the things that we did on the other side is we created a place to bring people back to, and I created a nice, beautiful little landing pad for me and whoever I was bringing back. So I had this landing pad. So I stepped down on the landing pad, and then I stepped off to the side so that I could see Mary, Sister Mary in profile. And then Sister Mary steps down. And then the next nun lands and moves into the back of Mary, becomes integrated into Sister Mary. Each nun does that, entering into the back of Sister Mary after landing, until all have landed and only Sister Mary is there. She is facing my guide, Samantha, who is always waiting when I retrieve someone and bring him or her back to Focus 27. Usually Samantha then takes the person that I have retrieved to wherever is appropriate for that person. But this time, my guide doesn't take Sister Mary anywhere. Sister Mary turns to me and walks towards me until she's right in front of me. She turns around and backs into me, integrates into me. I feel complete, even though I was not aware of feeling incomplete just a second earlier. I stand there with tears running down my whole being. I am complete. I don't know how else to explain what that means to me. Only those words describe the sensation. I am rooted there for some time, for all time, for no time. I am not empty. I am not alone. I am complete. I am ecstatically joyful. The experience fades after a while, and I am completely moved to tears with tears running down my face onto the pillow that I'm laying on in my isolation booth at the Monroe Institute. When the energy of Sister Mary and all of the other nuns came into me that day, it gave me a sense of completeness that I had not felt for 17 years. And I'm going to skip the 17-year thing because we're running late. But I had had a brief experience 17 years earlier of feeling complete, but then it went away. And it's described in some detail in the book if you're interested, but I want to kind of move forward. So I still feel complete. I since that happened, I have continued to feel complete. Whatever that means, I don't know what that means, but I know that that's how I feel. And before that happened, I didn't feel complete. I felt empty. So just a few things to say about this whole story, kind of wrap it up. I have moved off and on throughout my adult life, usually about every 5 years. I've been here in Ashland almost 20, but before that, about every 5 years, I moved to a different town, a different city, a different state, across country, for various reasons. So I've met a lot of new people over my lifetime. And invariably, there are people that I meet that think that I am a nun or that I have been a nun in this lifetime. And when people started telling me that, then I would swear, and I'd say swear words, and nuns didn't do that. But I stopped doing that after a while. But so, and then the other thing is, when I was taking the Anam Aira apprenticeship, I had a question one time that I wanted to ask Richard, and we were on a break, and he was standing up front. So I walked up to ask him this question. And as I walked up to him, he said, "You know, every time I see you, I want to call you Sister Mary." This was before the Sister Mary experience. And then the other thing that happened, there was a friend of mine here in town. She was a friend of mine, and then when my long-term partnership ended, she was my therapist for several years. And she had told me early on, when she first met me, that she wanted to call me Mary, or Sister Mary. So, you know, after I was seeing her as a therapist for a period of time, I asked her, I said, you know, how's that Mary thing going? And she said, when I know that you're coming, I have to sit and practice your name. You're Judy, you're not Mary. So when I got back from the Monroe Institute, I called her and I said, okay, you can call me Sister Mary now. Okay, so I'm going to do one more, and then I want to open it for questions. So this is another nun thing. So when I was taking the Anam Aira apprenticeship, Richard Groves had 4 banners up front, in the front of the room. He had the lectern, and then there were 2 banners on each side of him. I don't want to switch back, but there was a picture of it earlier on. But so the banners were pictures that represented the 4 pillars of the Anam Aira tradition. And one of those banners was a depiction of Bridget of Kildare. Bridget was considered to be one of the first Anam Airas in the land. Bridget was Bridget's father was a Celtic priest, and she was considered a Celtic priestess. And then it was during her lifetime that Catholicism started taking over the Celtic lands, and the Catholic Church maybe co-opted her, I don't know. But then considered her a Catholic saint. So she was Saint Bridget and Princess Bridget. And I went to Ireland with Richard. So these are two more we're going to skip. So I went to Ireland with Richard about a year after I finished the apprenticeship. We went to different sacred sites in Ireland related to the Anam Aira tradition. And this is Kildare, in Kildare, Ireland. And this is a picture I took of it's a statue of Bridget standing next to one of the Bridget wells. So I'm going to... So after 6 years of being an Anam Aira and all of that I report in my book, I still held two questions. Why did it feel like I had been hit with a bolt of lightning when Richard Groves first mentioned the concept of Anam Aira, those special people who escort people across the veil? And how did I know at that moment the work of being an Anam Aira was what I needed to do for the rest of my life? I wanted answers to those questions. Toward the end of the 6th year of being both an Anam Cara and an Anam Aira, I took a course in past life regression, a practice of working with a hypnotherapist to be verbally guided, called induction, into a meditative state to experience other lifetimes, called past lives. However, on the other side, as I've mentioned, there's no such concept as past lives. So from the concept of the other side of the veil, all lives are being lived simultaneously, which is hard to wrap your head around. So I had waited 2 years to take this course in past life regression from Rochelle Jaffe, who was a skilled hypnotherapist in Ashland. And she had a respected hypnotherapy school. And you were in this story. And this was the last class she was going to teach. She was going to retire. So I thought that, for some reason, I wanted to know how to do past life regression. And I wasn't quite sure why. I thought maybe it would be helpful for my clients. So when we started the class, Rochelle initially regressed some of us. Then we would alternate with a partner so that each one of us would take on the role of client and then hypnotherapist. Each time we were in the client role, we had to come up with a personal question. I knew my first question immediately. When did the concept of being an Anam Aira get anchored in my soul? That question actually surprised me. Anchored in my soul? Well, yes, I had to say that I felt like it had been anchored in my soul. Nothing had had such a profound, sudden, and shocking impact on my life as when I heard Richard describe an Anam Aira. From then on, I was driven to do that work, even though it had really never been practiced since medieval time. Having this weighty question to ask for the first time that I was being induced, I had to calm my excitement at lunch. So I walked around Rochelle's property for a while, and then the apprehension left. Finally, it was my turn. A friend regressed me. Karen and I were partners that time. So she regressed me through an induction. And initially, I could only sense darkness. Then I see light. I open my eyes, not Judy's eyes, the person I am now, in this different life. I am sitting in a building, a wooden building, a church of sorts. I look down at my lap. I have on a habit, a nun's habit. And and I'm one of perhaps 100 other nuns. We sit on wooden benches, focused on a teacher, a nun who is in front of us. We are being taught a skill. What skill? I listen. We are being taught to meditate, to become very still inside ourselves. It's very different from prayer, focusing internally, not externally to God. This is very different from what we are used to. Some of the nuns don't like being this way, but we are learning to do higher work. I will do my best. As I focus internally, I am lifted up. I say to myself, stay with it, stay with it. I'm up and out of my body, just as our teacher said would happen. Stay with it, calm, focus. This is what I'm saying to myself. What do I see? I am in a heavenly garden, but beyond any beauty I have ever known. The colors are so vibrant, the trees, the plants, the flowers. I have never seen such beauty before. The music, the heavenly sounds, created by the birds, the breeze, the dear animals, and who knows what else. The sound is coming from every direction. The sounds and the sights and the sweet smells, the absolute joy and love and peace that is here. This place is what our teacher wants us to become familiar with, being here. We will help people come here, this most beautiful and sacred place. After exploring, our teacher brings us back to the church. It is so pale compared to where we just visited. Our teacher says, this is our mission, our life, our purpose. We will help people die peacefully and gently and in a state of divine love. If they are scared, we will escort them over to this divine place. Yes, I can do this. It will be my honor for my life. Our teacher is very wise, well known in many of the local communities. Her name is Bridget. She comes from a neighboring province called Kildare. I am grateful to be a member of this group. We will be doing sacred work throughout the land. My friend who has induced me moves me forward in time to a time when I'm older in that same lifetime. I am walking on a path by myself. I am alone, but I am not lonely. I am full of joy and peace and love, and oh, the gratitude that fills my soul every day. I am on a glorious mission to help those afraid of dying, those afraid to let go of this life, even as the life is slipping away. I don't know how I became so privileged to be doing this work, yet I know I am. I help people really know, that we are heavenly souls. We are greater than our bodies. We are eternal beings. That's who we are at our innermost selves. I have gone from village to village for many years now, assisting those who need help when their life is finishing. I go over to the other side with them when needed, and I live in a state of ecstasy for some time after coming back from the other side. What could be better life than this? I am truly blessed. My friend brings me back to the present, to now. I am awash with tears. I now know why I focus so intently on the banner of Bridget of Kildare in the front of the conference room during those 2 years of the apprenticeship, and why I felt a deep connection to Bridget when I visited Kildare, Ireland, with Richard a few years after the apprenticeship. I was deeply moved to be walking on the same ground where Bridget was said to have walked. Dear Bridget had been my teacher those many lifetimes ago. She taught me to accompany souls back home, just as I'm doing now. I learned to go to that special place that 2 millennia later, Bob Monroe labeled Focus 27. And now, in the 21st century, I go there to assist others in going home, and I go there for my own continued growth and great joy. I know that being a soul companion is anchored in my soul, this most precious work, being an Anam Aira. This is my mission, my purpose for the rest of this life. For how many more lives, I don't know. I don't need to know. I trust my soul's urging. Final dots are connected.